محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, my dear brothers and sisters, and welcome to another edition of KMA Friday Night Mic Drop. We are going to have two very special guests joining us this evening. So I want to thank you all for joining us, whether you're joining us live or whether you'll be watching afterwards. For those who are watching live, you are more than welcome to leave your comments and questions in the comment box below the video on Facebook and on YouTube, if that's where you're watching. October is Islamic History Month in Canada, and we're taking this opportunity to talk to two people who are very closely involved with history, especially with Islamic history in Canada. So we're very pleased to welcome Sister Shahina Siddiqui, board member, board chair of Islamic History Month Canada, joining us from Winnipeg. Assalamu alaikum and welcome, Sister Shahina.
Wa alaikum assalam.
And we also have joining us from Toronto, Brother Hassam Munir, who is a historian. Welcome, Brother Hassam. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for having me.
Jazakallah khair to both of you for joining us on this Friday evening and taking out time away from your families. Let's get right into it. Sister Shahina, I know, mashallah, you're involved in a multitude of causes, mashallah. Why is Islamic History Month Canada so close to your heart?
You know, this is such an opportunity and a gift. And I must acknowledge that Dr. Al-Masri and Sister Wahida Valiante, it was their vision. But it is such a gift, especially now and today, and to see when there is so much misinformation, so much ignorance about Islam and about Muslims and Canadian Muslims, about Islamic civilization, Islamic history. This is not taught in schools. This is not taught in universities. So this forum, this month, gives us that opportunity to do it and do it in a positive way. We don't have to be defensive. We don't have to say Islam is peace and you know, we don't support terrorism or whatever. We just say who we are and what we are and where we come from and where we are going. And when I was asked in 2013 when CIC folded, would I take this on and take it forward? I was hesitant, as you know, I'm involved in so much stuff, but when I thought the vision of this, it's the only country, Canada is the only country in the world that has a whole month devoted to Islamic history, Islamic civilization. And so we couldn't let it die. We had to carry it on. I had a good team. Alhamdulillah, over the last 7 years, we have now come to a point where 4 provinces have proclaimed. Manitoba was the first to proclaim it. Cities have proclaimed it. Our team has worked very hard to bring it where it is. And when you get calls from schools and politicians who want photo ops with their proclamation, you know that it has an impact, and people want to come in and help you facilitate when you're invited to speak, not only about the Muslim community, but in general about Islam and Muslims, and again, not in a defensive way. So I'm hoping, inshallah, and I'm telling this first time to you that I will be stepping down from the chair position because 7 years is a long time. I have my good team, good young people who know social media, who can do things like this, which I have so much trouble doing. I will remain as an advisor, as a Manitoba rep, but I really want, you know, we elders need to know when is the time to step aside. Still remain, but step aside. So that's where it is.
MashaAllah, I'm sure it's going to be your loss is definitely going to be felt, I'm sure, around the organization and across the country, as far as Islamic History Month is concerned. Brother Hassam, you know, many people think that history is boring. You know, I was teaching a class the other day, and I asked the students in our first class as a sort of icebreaker, you know, what is one thing that you really dislike? And history was one of them. How do we make history in Islam, especially Islamic history, interesting and engaging, especially for young people?
So first of all, let me just quickly and duly acknowledge Sister Shahina and the team at Islamic History Month Canada Committee and the incredible work that they've done and enabled this for myself and many other people who have been actively involved for a few years now, alhamdulillah. Usually, when people ask me, or you know, they're kind of hesitant because they know I really love history. So though you know they want to say it, right? But they don't get into it right away. But sooner or later, he's like, yeah, history's kind of boring, right? And my first response to them is, I agree, right? And the reason I say that is because, to be honest with you, the way history is taught, and there's some research about this, there's discussion about this among historians, is that history is taught through such a specific lens. When when we're young and we're growing up and going through the school system, that is almost designed to, we're going to teach you certain things, but without actually inspiring you to learn more within this specific field, right? That's how it's sort of set up. And so it's a reality that history will be boring, and that's a perception that people take from their experiences within school, and it lasts, throughout their entire lifetimes. So I think to challenge that perception, it's on people like myself, and I take that responsibility. First of all, those of us who are in the field of history, to find ways to make it dynamic, to make it engaging. History is just human experience, and humans are always interested in the experiences of other human beings. This is why we're so into social media, right? This is why we're so into news, and this is why we're so into history. And history is just a bit distant from us on the time scale, but it's essentially the same thing. It's like reading through history is maybe reading through your Twitter feed, right? Or reading a newspaper, that sort of thing. And so we have to find the information, the aspects of the human experience that people are actually very interested in, and bring those into the conversation. And I think especially for young people, that's what will get them interested. But I'm usually starting a conversation with an audience where I know that they may not necessarily be interested, like especially if it's an Islamic school and I know these poor kids are being forced to sit here through my presentation, right? I'm going to try to start with the history of sports or the history of food, right? Like what are the things that people are already interested in, and try to bring in the history of that and the Islamic history of that and the Muslim contributions within those spaces. And that's when because it challenges within their minds right away, wait, this was supposed to be the boring guy who was going to talk about history, but he's talking about, fun stuff like, basketball, or he's talking about like mangoes and how mangoes spread across the world and stuff like that. So that's my approach to it.
Inshallah. No, that's amazing. Great to hear that, mashallah. Sister Shahina, what sort of response has Islamic History Month received over the years? So from its inception in 2007 until now, 13 years. How has it been received? And double barrel question, how has it evolved?
Yeah, I mean, it was a slow start. Community itself was having trouble buying into it. And so it slowly and gradually it has reached a point where recognition has happened, where communities are now calling us and saying, and individuals are calling us and saying, what can I do? How can I do it? I want to do something for Islamic History Month. People are asking for resources, and as you were talking about history, they want to know, what can they teach the students in their class? What is most interesting? I myself found history boring for the simple reason that we were made to memorize dates and names. And I've always had an issue with that. But what my grandmother and father taught me was learn from history. Not learn history, but learn from history. And that has stuck with me because when we don't learn, we make the mistakes again, right? When we learn for inspiration. So I think that has caught on because there was some resistance to having an Islamic History Month. People wanted it an Islamic civilization. Some wanted a different name. But I think the visionary founders of Islamic History Month knew that history encompasses all of it. right? So instead of it coming across as we are proselytizing, we were actually talking about facts, where, about the world and how things have happened. So I think to me, it has really come up. I wouldn't step away if I didn't know that we had received our goal, and we have, in the sense that so many people for 13 years, Sikander, you didn't talk to me about it. So that should just tell you how forward it has come. And it has gone totally non-denominational. So it's not about this masjid or that masjid, because we are independent board. And was very important to me. I said, I don't want to come under any umbrella, not even my own organization, Islamic Social Services. I want to remain independent, so that people feel welcome to join and understand that this stands for itself.
Mm-hmm. Inshallah. I wasn't doing my own show or these interviews. That's why I didn't get a chance to ask you. But I appreciate that. Brother Hassam, why is it important for us as Muslims to be aware of our history? Like, why does it matter? Why can't we just not care about what has happened in the past and just continue forward?
Because we can't actually detach ourselves from it. We're part of a continuum. We're related to both the past as well as the future, right? And history, for me, in my sort of understanding, what it essentially teaches us is, apart from broadening our range of experiences that we're exposed to, because we were born in a specific moment in time and we live within a specific moment in time, right? So the challenges we face today and the sort of range of solutions that we see available to us today, it often seems like that's the limit. Like, this is just the way the world has always been, right? But humans have found many ways to live in the past. Humans have found many ways to excel and realize their full potential in the past. Humans have had many failures in the past, some of which we continue to repeat, others of which we have learned from, right? So to broaden our range of knowledge that we can draw upon to continue learning. And then the other important aspect of it is that history teaches us that people are a product of their circumstances. And this is a very important lesson. Again, one of those things that's not actually emphasized, because, like Sister Shahina said, there's an emphasis on names and dates, but not really on meanings, right? On lessons. So history teaches us that people are a product of their circumstances. If you want to change people, if you think someone's behavior should be different, you have to change their circumstances, right? If we often tell people what to do, right? Or we should be doing this. Sometimes we say very politely, like, we should be doing this, we should be doing that. But I think what's important to keep in mind is that there are circumstances that shape how someone is going to receive that message that you're trying to share with them. So any form of ignorance in particular, whether it's like racism, whether it's misogyny, right? Any of these persistent forms and manifestations of ignorance in our societies, it's very important to understand how this has come to be, right? What were the circumstances that has made this it seems like it just can't be uprooted. There's no end to it, right? But there is an end to it. And that's why we study history, because we need to understand from the beginning what are the circumstances that continue to, in a way, force our decisions, and how can we get out of that situation and start making different kinds of decisions to leave a better world for generations of the future.
So like you said, we're I like that point, that we're living on a continuum, and we can't be detached from our past, because we do have a very deep and of course interesting history. Sometimes things which are controversial, perhaps, but nonetheless, it's important for us to be aware of that in order to learn and to be able to deal or to embrace the future in a good way. Sister Shahina, tell me about how the topics are chosen or the themes are chosen for Islamic History Month. I know, I believe it was last year that the theme was around reconciliation, I believe. And of course, I would think that it had to do with, of course, with indigenous brothers and sisters. And this year, I'm going to try to have it put it up here. You're talking about. Well, why don't you tell us about this year's theme?
Okay. We try to keep our theme current. So it's like connecting history to current events, right? So when we did reconciliation last year, and before that, get to know each other with the indigenous community, it was to tie it up with, that every Muslim country was colonized. So to share that experience of colonization of ourselves, plus joining it with the indigenous, so bringing the two communities together with understanding each other. This year, in fact, earlier we had decided on a different theme, which was to talk more about science. But when the events started to unfold that all of us saw on the screens, we very quickly realized, and one of our board members brought it up, saying, I think we should have something about Black Muslims. There was a twofold approach to this. One was recognizing that racism exists within Muslims. And it's not a new phenomena, that it has been going on. But how rarely do we actually talk about it? Right. So it was to look within as well and have sessions where we could reach out to the Muslim community and say, look within what. And the other was to be partners. The objective for myself and for our board for the Islamic History Month has been not to be working in a silo, because history doesn't work in silo. Right. So see what is happening, what lessons we can learn from history, and how we can inspire people as to how people found ways out of it. Right. So we have so much information in our own history in the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which tells us about racism. I was just on a panel of Abrahamic interfaith doing a Zoom session on what do our faiths offer against racism, for how to address racism. And I can tell you, subhanallah, this harm reduction that is in the Quran, which is such a new concept today, was there 1500 years ago. And how harm reduction on racism was thing. And then when you go into history and you say that we actually had prophets who were Black, right? How often do we talk about that? We had scholars who have made, exemplary contributions. We also had a whole dynasty of slaves, right? And whenever you talk about Black history or Black contribution, you're always hit with, well, Islam had slavery. Very few of us know that slavery predated Islam, and that Islam actually brought in incrementally steps by which it became obsolete. Right. So those conversations, that history, our young people need to know. We need to listen to our Black youths. We need to listen to our Black imams. I know that they have faced racism. We have privilege within the Muslim community. We rarely talk about it, but there is a group that has privilege in our community. And so when you have the issues that you have within, we need to see, okay, what can we offer others? How can we first, of course, continue to correct ourselves, but what can we offer others? And I can tell you in 1980s, at a conference, I was asked to speak about racism. So it's not something new that we are just starting to talk about. And I said it's a cancer in our community. Racism is a cancer. And if we don't do anything about it, we will find. And we have seen in our own cities, in our own streets, how people have come out, how much anger young people are holding. And I don't want our community, our youth to just to be angry. I want them to know that they can do something about it, that they should do something about it. And that we are created from one soul. So when you're created from one soul, how can one be better than the other, and so forth? So a lot of spirituality as well as concrete steps, and to make Canada racism free. But for that, we have to start from our community first, right? We need to examine what's rotting inside, so in order for us to fix what's out there.
Brother Hassam, when you look at some of the issues that the Muslims in Canada, Canadian Muslims, but also Muslims around the world, but maybe that would be too broad. So let's talk about Canadian Muslims. So when you look at the issues that Muslims in Canada are currently facing, what can we learn from Islamic history that can be applicable and that can really help us at this time?
I think there's many right answers to this. There's many components to this, and there may be very significant ones that I fail to touch on right now. But certainly the legacy of having a culture of learning. This is something that sociologists of Islamic history have described as, especially particularly in the early first few centuries of this expanding Muslim domain, and the culture that was nurtured within it was a culture of learning, a culture of where the social currency was what your place was in the exchange of knowledge, right? And I think that's something we have to revive as a community, not just use our careers and our personal choices as, this is something I need for my 9-to-5 job, or I'm doing this master's or this PhD just because just out of interest, or I find it fascinating. And we have to learn to have interdisciplinary conversations like we had in that original culture of learning, in places like the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, and places like Timbuktu in West Africa, right, in many different parts in the Muslim lands, and come together, people from different disciplines, and say, okay, we all agree that we have certain very pressing issues that we know we are required as, the Khalifa of Allah on earth to address, right? So environmentalism, for example, the enormous hanging over our heads kind of environmental crisis. But we need Muslims to develop this spirit, right? Learning from their history of coming together, people from across different fields and different disciplines coming to a table and saying, okay, what can you add to this conversation of value, right? And we need to start, having more communication among ourselves, and also realizing that our knowledge that we gain, whether it's the traditional Islamic knowledge or whether it's the academic knowledge that we gain within this particular setting that we're in Canada or in North America, it is not just for us to develop careers for ourselves, but it is to develop a better world through the work that we do, and that goes beyond merely our day-to-day 9-to-5 jobs. So among many other things, I think that is one crucial thing that we need to start to come together, focus on the challenges that we have within our communities and in society as a whole, and also, not undervalue the contribution we can make regardless of what your field is. And this is the most remarkable thing about that early culture of learning, right? And this is why I don't use the phrase golden age of Islam, even though the two overlap, right? But it's more about the culture of learning. It's like the golden age of Islam concept can be challenged, right? And it really doesn't tell you, well, it's something that was, but how did it come to be, right? That the concept itself, the name doesn't tell you that. But when you say culture of learning, it's like, okay, so this is a culture that was where learning was the central social activity. It was the central personal aspiration that was encouraged within society, and people developed solutions. And this is how Muslims transformed the world the first time around. And this is crucial to transforming the world today, and starting, as Sister Shahina mentioned, within our own communities.
Inshallah. Sister Shahina, I'll ask you a question, a similar question along the same lines. When you look at the current state of Muslims in Canada, of Canadian Muslims, what can we learn from Islamic history that can help us?
For the current Muslims, I mean, I agree with Hassam. Our approach has to change. The paradigm by which we see what Muslims should be doing, or what Muslims' role is in Canada and what we can contribute. I am finding that between a vast majority of our leadership, we are lacking the connection. And I think it's important for just not the leadership, but every individual of every generation to come together to say, okay, we learn from experience, we tap into the energy of the youth, and what can we do for Canada? See, we are still thinking that we have roots back home, and that's back home. When I go back to Pakistan, I talk about Canada as back home. I can't wait to get back, right? That kind of building roots was part of Islamic history. How did Islam spread? Not by the sword, by Muslims going and integrating, right, into that community, by intermarriages, by business, by education. And then they were respected for it, and they learned from it. Are we doing that? That's a question we need to ask. Most of the time, the conversation is about what wrong has been done to us. Even our political involvement is about what I can get out of it. We are doing window dressing and hoping nobody will see what we are really about, right? It's about getting in, and that's a disservice we are doing not only to our faith, but to our history, to our people, to our families. Uh, the hesitation to reach out to other communities, the hesitation to be involved and speak from a position of strength. We have so much, alhamdulillah, knowledge in our history, knowledge that others have taken and done grand things with it, while here we are ignorant about it, right? Because I was never taught Islamic history in a Roman Catholic convent school or college. It is only when I came to Canada and had the opportunity. So look at this as an opportunity. We think we chose to come here. No, it was chosen for us. But for what reason? Have we asked the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to say, Ya Allah, you put me in this corner of the earth, which is so cold. Why? Are we having that conversation and saying, okay, because the entire universe is a masjid, right? I don't need to be in a Muslim majority country to practice my faith, to share our knowledge, our accumulative knowledge, to reach out, to know each other. So I think unless Muslims really think as Canadian Muslims, how many of us have put statements out today or 2 days ago about Mi'kmaq fisheries? Has that not hurt us as Canadians, that our fellow Canadians are hurting? And things. But if something happens in a Muslim country, we are out there with statements. We are out there with going to the parliament and saying we want this and we want that. How will anybody take us seriously enough unless we start first as Canadian? And it's not that our heart doesn't hurt for every Muslim, it should, but it should hurt for every human. That's the first challenge, right? And if you look at Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his sunnah, he just didn't care for his people. He cared for everyone, and that is why everyone came to him, right? Everybody listened, even if they disagreed. They had respect for him and what he had to offer. So my hope, inshallah, before I leave this world, is that that paradigm shift happens. Because if it doesn't, our youth will suffer.
May Allah preserve you, Sister Shahina. Brother Hassam, speaking of youth, what are the harms or the risk if our youth don't connect with Islamic history? What's at stake?
Well, there's a whole bunch of missed opportunity, right? And this is something we've seen in sort of recent generations, people who did not have the privilege to study history, Islamic history, and it is a privilege, right? Knowledge itself is a privilege. And we see how many people around the world, including how many Muslims, don't have access even to basic literacy, let alone knowledge about anything or Islamic history or something like that. And so it's really about missed opportunities. And for me personally, it's based on my understanding of history. The risk is that you continue to face the same challenges that previous generations have faced, and you continue to, in fact, leave the world, because the world in general is, regardless of your personal decisions, right? Um, and this is sort of the thing, like, you can have personal opinions about something, but the world is moving in certain directions, right? We have issues of fake news and misinformation and information overload. We have issues of environmental degradation. We have issues of racism. We have issues of misogyny, and those continue. Now, what kind of world are we leaving for future generations, right? So this is, I think, one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is our general accountability, right? We, on the day of judgment, when we are questioned about, and the way I envision, right? And you are yourself an Imam, mashallah, so feel free to correct me if I say anything incorrect. But the way I envision it is, it's not, yes or no questions. Did you make the environment better or not, right? It's and my parents always used to tell me, and they still tell me, that deeds will be weighed, not counted, right? Is the weight of the deed. So it's more like, did you put your absolute best effort, right? Did you put your best effort into making the world a better place as a Khalifa of Allah on earth for everyone, for all of Allah's creation, right? The human beings and everything else in nature. Did you make the best effort? And it's impossible to make that best effort without, again, like I said earlier, to go back to the past, right? And see, where did the problem begin from in the first place? And also, what solutions were tried in the past that maybe we've forgotten about, right? And it's very fascinating because, to me, just the history of Muslims in Canada, which is usually a topic I try to focus on primarily in discussing at lectures and events, that itself has so many lessons that are so relevant to the conversations we are having today and to the solutions we are trying to build today, that we don't even have to go far. Right here in the communities where we live, Muslims once lived, often much longer ago than we expect them to, right? And they were working on solutions that maybe we need to recover and move forward. So ultimately, it's not so much about, I think risk is maybe anywhere you put it, it's going to be hard to slice, right? But it's more, I think, if we start thinking of missed opportunities, right? And missed opportunities that we may be questioned about on the day of judgment. You had an opportunity that many people don't have. We live very privileged lives in Canada, generally speaking, right? There's differences, but we, generally speaking, compared to most of the world, we have access to resources, knowledge, right? We have financial stability, we have religious education, we have our imams for guidance, right? We have really all the key ingredients. Now it's just a matter of, did we use those to be at the forefront of the cause of good, not only for our communities or Canada, but for the world, right? Did we use those, right? And even initiatives like Islamic History Month, for example, is an effort, right? It's an effort in that direction. One thing I want to mention before I forget to mention it, just came to my mind. Washington, D.C. declared this month Islamic History Month. The first city in the United States declared October, as of this month, Islamic History Month, right? And it's not just some little town somewhere in Texas or something like that. It's Washington, D.C., right? So it's significant. And this is how you see how we as, Canadian Muslims, and particularly young Canadian Muslims, you start something and you see the ripple effects of it beyond even just Canada. You start to see sooner or later the ripple effects and the impact everywhere. So I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I hope it's some food for thought on this question.
Absolutely. No, I'm thinking back to when I was younger. I was one of those people who struggled with history. Found it challenging to get through history lessons and books. But at some point, I actually realized that there were lessons to be learned, because there were actually things that I was facing today, or that we were seeing today, that had happened in the past, or there were parallels that could be drawn, or there could be lessons that could be learned, and that's for me personally, I think that's when it really opened it up, that hey, we don't really need to reinvent the wheel. Humanity in general, and we as Muslims have gone through challenges in the past. We face situations, and there are lessons to be learned from there. And a lot of times, as the saying goes, history will repeat itself. So for me personally, as someone who was not really a fan of history generally, that's really when the light bulb went off, and I said, hey, I really ought to be paying attention to history because there's really something to learn there. Sister Shahina, I'm curious to know, I'll tell you, there's stereotypes associated with history or events that have to do with history as to the types of people who are going to walk in through the door, or the types of people that are going to be interested. So I'm curious to know, like, when we talk about Islamic History Month in Canada and events happening across the country, which groups of people or which institutions are you finding to be most interested and most engaged in this project from outside the Muslim community?
Outside the Muslim community, we, of course, see an interest of politicians, so we will not talk about that. They have their own agenda, but it's good. We need them as well. For ourselves this year, RCMP, our D division in Manitoba, is been playing like monitors playing about Islamic History Month, about who are Muslims, and highlighting our heroes and heroines. So that we will be running the whole month this year. So every province and every city has a different sector of community interested, depending on who you have reached out or who has bought into it. Schools are another. If you go to the education website in Manitoba, for example, you see class lessons, what teachers can do, how to do it. And I think my advice to everyone listening, and maybe they take the voice of schools are the one we should target. Okay, schools are the fundamental area where we can reach our youth. Plus, we can bring youth of different communities together. It will build the self-esteem of our children. When they walk into a school and they see a poster about, did you know algebra, who brought, or who, as the scientist and so forth. We are short of funds. I would love to have those kind of posters, the money to make those posters and put them out because whatever racism is going on and Islamophobia going on in Canada, our youth are losing their self-esteem. Right, their image, the self-image is threatened, and so how do you build it up? How do you build somebody's self-esteem? First, to show them that they first belong to this country. Secondly, they come from a rich heritage. A rich heritage is not about money, right? It is about a civilization. It is about the achievements of scientists and architects and medicine and so forth. And so many of our own children, we assume they know. They don't. They don't know their history. Their parents probably don't know their history. But if you go to the Quran, most of it is about history, the history of the prophets before us, of the people before us. But what does Allah teach about them is what lessons can we learn? How did they overcome the difficulties? So if the our book, our revelation is about history, how can we ignore history? That there must be significance for it, right? It must be important to teach, but tell the history as a story. You and I probably didn't find it because our teachers were boring, right? And so we need to know how to tell stories, how to make it fun and fascinating, and that's where the schools come in. So the teachers, regardless of whether they are Muslim or not, have the training to make lessons interesting, right? So if we reach out to the teachers societies and we say, look, you have a whole month, and by this you will be achieving all these things, and so you'll be surprised how many teachers don't know. I speak to hundreds of teachers and give seminars and workshops, and a simple question about, do you know who? They do not, because they were taught in universities where the Latin names of these scholars were used. So how are they going to know that this was a Muslim, or this was an Arab, or this was an Ethiopian, right? So we need to make it alive again. And the best place is to start from schools and then the media. Media hasn't caught on to Islamic History Month yet, right? So how do we get them interested? So I think that would be my advice. Start with this education system.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, because when kids go into a school and they see, like you said, Muslim kids going to a school, going to their school, and they see that Islamic History Month is something that's being celebrated, is being marked. There are speakers coming in, or there's activities taking places, or even if there's a simple billboard acknowledging the fact. I'm sure that that has a positive effect in terms of their identity, in terms of their self-esteem, and self-pride as well, right? With regards to their culture, their background, and their religion. So no, that's a really important point, Sister Shahina, that you bring up. Brother Hassam, let's say you have a young person who hasn't really thought about history, Islamic history, not really engaged. What would be your elevator pitch? Like, how do you get them excited about history? Because again, I think the biggest challenge, I'm a marketing guy as well. So from a marketing point of view, is how do you make history interesting and something to be excited about? So what will be your pitch?
Micro marketing, all right? Look, if my first question when people, and often this question comes up to me in the form of people asking for book recommendations, right? They'll be like, "What can I read?" Or they're like, "Oh yeah, like I'm just so into Islamic history," and we have to realize how vast of a topic Islamic history is. When we say Islamic history, we are technically speaking about the experience of any Muslim anywhere, or even if there's no Muslims involved, the influence of Islam in different places. Like it's just, it's incomprehensibly vast, and you could study it forever. So when people usually come to me and say, um, where should we start studying history? Or if I were to go to someone and try to pitch to them, if I wanted a certain person, let's say my younger brother, to start studying history, how would I pitch it? Right? The first thing, the most important thing, and I think this goes for education in general, is to figure out what that young person is already interested in. Right? And this is sort of what I alluded to earlier. Like, what are they already interested in? Because Islamic history has its ties everywhere, right? There's historians who have argued very emphatically that Islam was the world's first truly global civilization, right? A civilization that had so many core values in common, from Japan to like Argentina in South America, right? So for me, it's about instead of starting them off at a particular place, if I know that they have like a certain level of maturity and they're more serious about Islamic history, then I'll always say start off with the seerah, right? Start off with the like how well do you know the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then continue on from there. Because if you really understand and learn in detail the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you will I feel like you will generally feel compelled to continue the story afterwards. You don't want that story to end. So what happened to the Sahaba? And then what happened in the generation after the Sahaba? And then it just keeps going for a significant length of time, right? Because you find like, okay, you want to build that complete connection between the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's life and yourself. Like, how did it come to me? How did I come to be Muslim where I am today? But really, when it's a younger person, especially like someone teenaged or someone just starting university or something like that, they'll ask me a question and I'll ask them 10 questions back. Like, what do you study? Right? What's your favorite sport? What do you like to eat? Right? If somebody like food is, by the way, food history among the field of history is the fastest growing subfield of history, because people are increasingly interested in culture, right? People want to know about culture. We're tired of learning about like this war happened and then they came back and this other war happened. Like, come on, those things are significant to a certain extent, but tell us about food, tell us about culture, tell us about things that we can still tangibly relate to. Like, half, like not half, but it's an exaggeration. A significant portion of the world's languages, the word that they use for eggplant, right? Even in the UK, it's aubergines, right? It comes from the name of one 8th century woman in Baghdad whose name was Buran, right? And she revolutionized cooking eggplants. So from Malaysia to the West Indies, like the name for eggplant that's still used to this day is her name, right? So you sort of pique people's attention to the concept in general by figuring out where their attention already is, right? Whatever they're interested in. I keep using sports and food. I think I love sports and I love eating. Those are two of my favorite examples, right? But food history, sports history, you will be surprised. You will be surprised, like how quickly people are drawn in. So that's my advice. If you're like a parent, or if you're an older sibling, or if you're an imam and you're in the community, or you're meeting young people, like make it more of a conversation, right? They'll come to you usually asking like, and one of the things that imparts, by the way, is that, oh yeah, we're cool. Like, the guy, I came to him asking questions about history. He's talking to me about like, maybe not eggplant is a great example for young people, but like mangoes or chocolate or coffee, right? Talk about coffee. Start there. So that's my kind of approach, is that you learn and you micro market to that specific person, because you want to successfully impart to them that there is something valuable in this concept called Islamic history. And so you tell them what they already care about, make the Islamic history connection, and that'll inspire them to go off on their own and start learning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hey, you got me with the eggplant even, so let alone the coffee. No, that got me thinking. So, I mean, in terms of how, Sister Shahina, I'll ask you this. In terms of how Islamic history has been taught, has been communicated up until now, what sort of role is there for multimedia, especially when we think of, how Canadian history has been presented. So, for example, when we talk about the example of, the historical heritage minutes, right? So if we were to do something like that, or if there already is something like that for Islamic history, like what is what impact, what is the feasibility of doing something like that, and what sort of impact would it likely have?
Sikander, as Hassam was saying, it is such a wide field. And that is why at Islamic History Month, our approach has been to pick a theme and build on it. Right, and keep it current and keep it relevant. Sometimes you lose your audience if you're not relevant to their experience, to their environment. So it's that is the reason for choosing themes, but still we leave it open to communities to decide how they want to go forward with that theme. Also, finding people who of other communities who would collaborate with you. Finding similarities, finding things we did together. I mean, for example, of Spain, and how scholars of all faiths and of all communities came together for the benefit of humanity, right? So I think there are many approaches that can be applied. I don't want to give a cookie cutter response to this, because the richness of our traditions, the richness of Islamic history, and how far it spread, and how far it made a difference in almost every discipline of human life, and yet stayed true to its source. Right, that is the absolute beauty of Islamic history. So I think not to compartmentalize things, because we do in Western societies, in the way we teach, we compartmentalize things. I don't want that for Islamic History Month. I want it to be as rich, as open as it can be, so that people can pick what interests them, and that interest will take them to learning, and that learning will expand their understanding, and then they will need to know more. I don't want to bombard people, overwhelm people, but I want to start curiosity. And I give you a simple example. In Manitoba, in Winnipeg, our organization under Islamic History Month does a multicultural tea fest. Okay. Now you would think, okay, so people go, they have their tea. No, we have conversations there, because tea is a culture which is shared by every other culture, right? So yes, the Ethiopian coffee ceremony is different from the Japanese tea ceremonies, and we have all those displayed. But people go, and over tea, you are relaxed, you're talking, you're learning, and so why don't you have pork? Well, we don't have hot dogs for tea, but we have pakoras for tea, or we have something else. So making it fun. And every time we get the feedback, about 400 to 600 people come through the doors, mostly almost non-Muslim, who give us, and then we have the screen just, did you know Islam this? Did you know? And then we have asked questions. Who was the first Muslim? When was they born in Canada? And the kids come forward to the stage, and we have somebody from either CBC or other media outlets doing the emceeing, and they themselves keep saying, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. And then they talk about it the next morning about it. So making it fun, not confrontational, making it a learning thing. And a lot of teachers come and pick up our material to go and talk about it. So many different ways, and many different communities are doing it, but keep it vibrant. uh, don't make it about fiqh. Don't make it about comparative religions. Make it about our history. The pulpit is enough for that. But for the Islamic History Month, make it about human civilization and what Islamic civilization and history had to contribute to it.
Mhm. Brother Hassam, in terms of, I know you have a background in media as well. So, I mean, in terms of communicating Islamic history, especially to, younger audiences, and making it to where they actually are, right? Like the platforms that they're currently using. What are, some of the tools that can be used? So that's why, I brought up the Heritage Minutes, because I know that they condense history in such a way, or historical events, that it makes it interesting and easy for people to watch and share. I know there's, many young Muslims who are huge fans of watching Ertugrul as well, young and old as well. So, I mean, having these types of, different projects and initiatives that take historical events and dramatize them, or, present them in a way that's different than what we're used to. What's the scope there? What's the potential there, in your opinion?
Before I answer the question, I just want to respectfully comment on one thing that Sister Shahina said, which she said, "Don't bring up fiqh," right? And I think let's make one exception to that, because for anyone who's listening, and for ourselves as well, the 12-member jury system that's used in Canada and the Commonwealth countries today is directly inspired by a concept in North African Maliki law that was used like 800 years ago, called the Lafif system. So keep that in mind. You can read that up on that online. But I love using that example of how Sharia law is used in every court in Canada, and so the contributions are everywhere. But coming back to the question, I think multimedia is obviously incredibly important, right? Moving forward. In-person gatherings are the best. They are ideal. Like the gathering that Sister Shahina just described, I feel like person-to-person conversation is the ideal form, right? Going to their spaces, bringing them into our spaces, into our MSAs and mosques, and neutral spaces, tea parties, all these kind of things are very important and very effective. Moving forward, I feel like multimedia is going to be increasingly important. We've seen the impact and the possibility of something like Ertugrul, right? And I recommend, knowing that Ertugrul is like pseudo history, I will be the first to watch it and the first to recommend it to someone else. Because there's still elements of culture. It's still like a normalized portrayal of somebody trying to live as a Muslim within a particular cultural, Turkish interpretation of that, right? So it's something. It's a start. Um, I've had friends speak to me, and we're talking about it, and they'll bring up something like the Hashishiyun, right, which is like a particular movement that existed in some segments in Islamic history. And I'll be like, where did you learn that? And they'll be like, Assassin's Creed, the video game, right? Because when you're introducing the video game concept is based on that, and movies come out of that and stuff like that. So I think, and personally, I do a lot of public history work on Instagram, especially. And my master's research is actually focused on this. How can we use multimedia tools, the digital technologies that have been enabled in the past 2 or 3 decades, and use that to enhance our learning of Islamic history. And people have told me, to be very honest, they're like, you're on the wrong platform. Like Instagram is for food bloggers and fashion bloggers and not for Islamic history dudes, right? But I was like, let's give it a shot. I mean, I'm on the app anyways. I can prepare some content on, regularly and try to upload it. And people are very, very appreciative of it, right? And it forces me, because I'm an academic, to understand the audience and repackage my content accordingly, right? On Instagram, I can't have like 5 paragraphs of like text just going off about like some specific thing. I have to like really think about, like Sister Shahina mentioned earlier, what's the real, like, the juice here? What is this whole narrative that I'm looking at? What's the real story? What's the lesson, right? Because it's Instagram, I only have so many lines and I have to make it visually appealing and stuff like that. So for me, it helps me as well. So all of these multimedia projects, a lot of podcasts. There's like so many Islamic history podcasts that have started up, like literally due to the pandemic. I think just the pandemic happened, and then within the past few months, we've had like 3-4 different podcasts just on Islamic history starting. So these kind of multimedia products, I think they're going to be absolutely essential moving forward, as well as large scale projects. Like, I take the example of Pakistan, people translating Urdu into Urdu, or dubbing it, right, and then presenting that. And I'm like, but you have your own history, right? And in many parts of the Muslim and some of the largest media powerhouses, like we tend to forget, like, Pakistan is capable of doing this kind of work. We've seen series come out of Egypt, very high quality, well produced, and really the connecting point for young people to re-engage with Islamic history. Nigeria is a media powerhouse. They have huge capability to do this kind of work. And in Canada as well, I think we have a lot of local history that if we were to repackage in some format like Heritage Minutes, and by the way, there is a Heritage Minute about Richard Pierrepoint, who was probably the first Muslim, the first Canadian of Muslim background. We don't know exactly if he was Muslim or not, but he was here in the late 1700s in southern Ontario, early 1800s, and there is a Heritage Minute about him. But I think if we were to, start using these technologies more creatively, and I'm, for anyone who's listening, wherever if this gets seen, like, I'm definitely open to working on that sort of thing. We saw it at RIS a few years ago. They did a virtual tour. They set up virtual reality stations at the Reviving the Islamic Spirit conference in Toronto. I believe it was last year, actually, and they had it set up, and the kids would not get off. And all it was, what was it? They had recreated what Mecca and Medina would have looked like in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They just recreated it in virtual reality, and like, kids couldn't get off that thing. It's just a cool way to learn, even though there's incredible scholars in the hall next to that, right, where they're giving lectures and stuff like that. But that's for a different audience, especially for young people. You're going to have to invest in these kind of projects and products.
Exactly. Sister Shahina, as we're wrapping up, we are receiving questions about resources for parents to be able to give to their schools or to be able to introduce their schools with regards to Islamic History Month. What's available for them?
Well, resources are mostly the ones that we can provide them online. Information, for example, putting them in touch with people like Hassam, who can be invited to schools to speak, and who know the environment and the culture of our youth, right? And speak to it. So those are the kinds and we have a list of other scholars and speakers who we feel would appeal to young people and also community at large. So we are the clearinghouse, the hub of where, and if you have information, and I'll ask Hassam the same thing, send it our way so it can be in our archives, it can be in our library. And this idea of heritage moments, we have so many of them and so beautiful, and especially as a woman, if I might plug in, is that we rarely recognize Canadian Muslim women who have made such amazing contributions to Canada, not just to the Muslim community, but to Canada. We don't do that. One way of addressing misogyny, as Hassam has said so many times, is to bring out the positive stories. I did a booklet that took me 3 weeks to do, is collect since for 60 years, the Muslim women who have been here. And it came in the early 1900s, how they contributed. And it's all in a book. And you can see when we released it, their grandchildren and great grandchildren came, and they were so proud of it. Oh, that's my grandma. She's on the screen. This is what she contributed. So those are the kinds of stories too, along with the history, to also bring these current contributions that Canadian Muslims are doing to Canada and to the world.
Mm-hmm. So how can people get these resources, Sister Shahina? Are they on the website?
Yeah, just go to our Facebook, or we are now on Instagram as well. Request or go to the website. We are still developing the website. It's not the best. So my appeal right now is to the volunteers out there who are good at it, want to come on. We will take you on the team for Islamic History Month. If you have resources, we don't. We got a little bit of money from when CIC folded for Islamic History Month. We are not a charity, so we can't really do fundraising if people want tax receipts. But what better place to give some of your funds, not all, there are many others who need it, but for knowledge, because this is all we are doing, is we are sharing knowledge. And that's one of the greatest sunnahs of Prophet Muhammad and his tabi'in for us to follow.
So Islamic History Month Canada on Facebook and Instagram, they can just send a message and ask for some resources, and you'll be able to.
Yes, and somebody will get back to them.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. Jazakallah khair. Brother Hassam, along the same lines as well, as we close, people are asking for multimedia resources that they can show to their kids or share with their kids related to Islamic history.
So yeah, you can find my Instagram from your own account, hopefully not your kid's account. So Instagram is where I try to do most of the work, and it's an experiment to see what works and what doesn't work. And this is ultimately feeding, inshallah, into my master's research on how we use digital technology to teach Islamic history. But I have a blog as well. It's called iHistory. So that's www.ihistory, like iPhone, but ihistory.co, not .com, .co. And I always have to explain, like, it's a very short address, but it always takes like a minute to explain. But I've written articles. Some are there, some are in the work, so they may be there. And I think moving forward, especially, I know people want resources now, but moving forward by next year, I know there's a few books being written on the history of Muslims in Canada, particular periods. There's some good work being done, alhamdulillah, that I can't go share publicly yet, but it's being done. That will be available certainly by next year. So please, if you have specific questions about anything, like curiosity, like I really do mean anything, right? Like anything. And you want to know the Islamic history of something that you've thought, or if there's any Islamic significance, reach out to me. I'm not trying to say that in a sense that I have the knowledge that I'll just drop on you right away and give it to you. But one, it gives me a sense of what people in the community are interested in learning about. So maybe I can orient my efforts in that direction. And then secondly, I can guide you to resources on different topics that I've come across over the years, because especially the history of Muslims in Canada, it's very patchy. You have to kind of thread the needle and bring it all together. And hopefully within the next few years, we'll have more concrete and comprehensive resources. And the last thing I will say, and I say this with a lot of caution, is to Google, right? And obviously, disclaimer: don't believe everything you see on the internet, right? In fact, when you see something on the internet, claim it's not, or just believe for a second that this is somehow not an accurate representation of the truth, and then dig a bit deeper. That being said, if you learn how to Google, specific things, you will be surprised at the kind of information you can find. Like once the theme became Black Muslims in Canada, right, or Black Muslims generally, and I started really digging into this topic that, what can you find? The government of the Yukon Territory has an entire website on Black history in the Yukon Territory. and it's well designed. There's so much information, there's pictures, there's all kinds of fascinating things, right? But it's just about getting out there, Google, and set aside like maybe some time of your week or something like that, and be like, 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to learn something new about Islamic history this week. Like every Friday night for like 10 minutes, I'm just going to Google something new, see what I find. Now, what you don't do, first of all, use your critical reading skills. And secondly, what you don't do is if you find something, immediately start forwarding it to all your WhatsApp contacts. Please don't do that, right? But, think on it. Once you read something, think about it, try to learn more in the coming weeks, reach out to me, and I can maybe guide you to further resources, and then you can continue your learning journey, inshallah. But that's some of the advice I would give for learning further.
Wonderful. Jazakumullah khair, both of you. Thank you so much for spending part of your Friday evening with us. Once again, I would like to reiterate what Sister Shahina was saying to all the parents out there who have children going to whichever school, including Islamic schools, public schools. Do reach out to your schools to mark Islamic History Month. Every year in October, contact Islamic History Month Canada on Facebook and Instagram or through their website to get resources that you can share or that can help you introduce Islamic History Month to your children's schools. And be in touch, follow Brother Hassam, Munir, and contact him for resources, and be on the lookout for multimedia content, inshallah, that hopefully will be developed soon. Sister Shahina, I'm thinking here out loud, but it would be wonderful to have some sort of, if it hasn't been done already, perhaps a coordinated campaign between Islamic History Month Canada and organizations like NCCM and others as well, and local organizations sort of across the country to really promote Islamic History Month in schools, because I really do think you're absolutely right that that's an excellent way to help our children and also their peers as well in understanding and appreciating our history and our background. And Brother Hassam, with your background in media and your master's studies in multimedia and presentation of Islamic history, really look forward to that because as a media provider, I really see the value in that and the best way to, like, I agree with you that it's great to have one-on-one conversations, Sister Shahina, to have tea and things like that. But if we really want to get the message out, to the masses on a large scale, even within the Muslim community, then multimedia is going to be key for that. So yeah, any final thoughts? Or if not, I know it's been a while. It's a long conversation. So thank you, Jazakumullah khair, for that. But go ahead if you'd like to say anything.
My only final thought is that you and Hassam have to be on our board. Okay, and I don't want to hear a no, because as you said, there's so much to be done, and the more sharing happens.
On one condition, that you remain the chair.
Yes, because they've all tried that. Inshallah.
Please. Bless
we
you.
Need you, young people. Yeah. Okay. Assalamu
alaikum. So just one final thought from my end. It's not just about the content producers, it's also about the consumers, and this has to be a two-way street. And so please, when you see content online, whether it's on the Islamic History Month Canada page or or if it's my page or something like that, and many others are doing great work, please engage with it, right? Please do make that little bit of extra effort to really stop for a second when you're scrolling and see, like, what is this all about, right? It's Islamic History Month, and people are putting in a lot of effort into bringing this stuff together and trying to make it bite-sized so it doesn't take too much of your time, trying to make it fun. There's a lot of effort being put into it, so your engagement is always appreciated, your criticism as well, when you have criticism on how we can do better and what else we can present to you. Please share all of that as well, but please, let's make it a conversation, right? That's the fun, right? And that's the engagement that we need to have within our Muslim community before we can really start making an impact outside. So let's make it a conversation, inshallah.
Inshallah, and make sure that criticism is constructive, as I always say. Thank you so much to both of you. Really, it's been a pleasure having you with us, and all the best in all of the great work that you're doing. MashaAllah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all your efforts and continue to bless you and strengthen you. Jazakumullah khairan.
Ayakum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
All right, Jazakumullah khair, my brothers and sisters, and thank you so much for tuning in tonight. For those who are watching live and those who will be watching later as well, a very interesting conversation about an important topic, a topic that could, sometimes be a little bit dull, but as we can see, that there's a lot for us to learn, and that is why we should be caring about Islamic history, connecting our children, our youth with history as well, and really making an effort on our part in whichever way that we can contribute, whether it's introducing Islamic History Month to our children's schools, or whether it's volunteering with helping run the Islamic History Month Canada website, or giving ideas to Brother Hassam, or collaborating, coordinating in terms of multimedia. This is an area that we really need to promote, and we really need to start caring about. And I really hope that, inshallah, after hearing these types of conversations, we will all be motivated to do that, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairah. Thank you so much. Please take care of yourselves and your families, and have a great weekend. And we look forward to seeing you next time on KMA Friday Night Mic Drop, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairah.